Coming up next on the Filthy Rich Cleaners podcast.
Once you get to a certain level in your business, that's what starts to happen. Is this good? Is this bad? Because you're no longer behaving like a tech anymore.
From your first dollar to your first million, welcome to the Filthy Rich Cleaners podcast, presented by ZenMaid. Join your host, Stephanie Pipkin, founder of Serene Clean, as she shares proven tips, tricks, and hard-earned lessons. Whether you're just starting out or ready to scale, get ready to discover how to build your own cleaning empire. Let's roll up our sleeves and dive in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Filthy Rich Cleaners podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie from Serene Clean, and in today's episode, by popular demand, I will be going through our performance review and wage guidelines document that we have created this past year at Serene Clean. And I know I had touched briefly on this when it came to a couple of videos ago where I did the history of Serene Clean from a how much were we paying and how much were we charging perspective. And several of you had expressed interest in having this broken down as well. And I know it may seem, as you guys are listening to episodes, that we just have like a million documents, a million guidelines, a million policies. And you'd be correct because that's what it takes in a proper business to be able to protect yourself and to hold people accountable and have something to point to that you can confidently take action off of. It is such a relief to have these types of things in place and not have to wonder at every single situation, how should I behave? Because there is no standard set. It's very hard on your brain to have to come up with, what do I do here in every situation? And obviously, not saying that that does not happen in Serene Clean still all the time, but we can always have something that's like, okay, this situation happens. Well, what does it say in this policy? What does it say in this policy? Or if we need to fire somebody and we need to document it, well, they clearly violated this guideline or this policy that they had signed, and it makes it very cut and dry when we are doing like a termination letter, or if somebody is behaving in a way that's not conducive to one of the policies, we have something to point to. It also really takes off this kind of pressure, at least for me as somebody who doesn't really, enjoy disciplining at all employees, that instead of it being like me disciplining, it's like, hey, you signed and agreed to this and you're not doing this. And I can kind of point to the document. And that makes me feel a lot less anxious about it because it's like a third entity almost. It's not me and the cleaning tech. It's me cleaning tech and document that they agreed to, right? And things that they said that they were going to do and that they are not. So it just makes it a lot easier for everybody involved, I think, to have very clear guidelines. And that is what we're going to be talking about today in the performance review and wage guidelines document that we put together. I believe it was at the beginning of 2025. And we have already seen such a benefit from introducing this into Serene Clean. And I'll explain why, of course, and explain what we used to do when it came to performance reviews, what we did before when it came to raises and wages. And in the past 6 months since we've introduced this, it has really just provided a lot of clarity for not only us, but all of the techs. And that is my biggest kind of takeaway from implementing something like this is people really appreciate clarity when it comes to what they can expect financially from you as an employer. Previously, there was a lot of gray area and a lot of confusion on both their parts and our parts because we had never spelled out how is it and when are you going to get a raise? Why will you not get a raise? What's going to take away from a raise? Because we had not sat down and ironed out all of these details. And a lot of times when we avoid putting policies into place into our cleaning business, I find it's because we do not want to take the hour-long hard thinking moment it's going to take in order to think through the different scenarios and does this make sense from all angles, et cetera, et cetera. And it really is so much easier now with AI. We definitely use that heavily to critique our own policies and try to poke holes in it. I find that that's a very useful thing to do, saying, hey, you are an expert HR executive. please poke holes in this document or policy. Is there any type of gap? Is there anything that you could see arguing against? We're in the state of Wisconsin, blah, blah, blah. Like doing these types of things is very helpful. And so previous to sitting down at the beginning of the year with my managers and saying, okay, we need to iron this out. We want to go about raises differently. We want to go about communicating what the expectations are and what it means to violate an expectation, et cetera. And so the reason that we felt that this was really necessary was we wanted to increase the upper wage ceiling of what our cleaning techs can make. Previous to this being implemented, they could be making up to $21 an hour. And as of now, they now can make up to $25 an hour. And remember that we all have potentially different things when it comes to how much we're going to pay people, what we're charging versus what we're going to pay. And I will say all of this, what I'm about to go over in our document, it's wildly different than the pay per performance model that many of you have been introduced to or are using currently in your business. And as I always say, there is so many ways to skin the cat of our cleaning business. And that truly applies to every area of business, whether that be the types of tasks you do, how you charge, and how you pay staff. All of these things can be done in a successful manner in a variety of ways. So I am not necessarily knocking pay for performance, if I could say it. And so what that means is typically paying a percentage of what the appointment cost is and perhaps having different percentage tiers. I've seen it work very, very well. I've also seen some negatives about it as well, just from my own consulting client experience, talking to folks who do it that way. There is a lot of benefits, but some of the detracting things that have been communicated to me are things along the lines of people getting complacent or basically having nothing to strive towards because they're immediately like introduced into the business and paid this wage from day one. And I don't mean like that's clearly a positive thing because they're getting those higher wages. But from a stagnation perspective, if you are giving them that top pay right away, and they have nowhere to go from there, and they're planning to work for you for years, it really is a psychological thing we're talking about. When you have nothing to strive for, perhaps there is no upward mobility in your business. Oftentimes in a cleaning business, there's not a lot of upward mobility. There's just not that many positions until we're talking like corporation size, right? Like my business, has been over $1 million for several years now where, we hover around 1.4 or wherever we're at a year now. And we are 6 years in and we have 3 full-time managers. I operate remotely and then, and do not work full-time, nowhere near in the business. And then we have one person who is kind of, in the field, Hannah, my field development and quality controller and trainer. We've got one of those. And I know a lot of you guys have, lead trainer positions and things like that, but we're really just not talking about a ton of upward mobility from a position perspective. So the reason I say this as a possible detractor to paying for I will never say that right, guys. Okay. Pay for performance, whatever the fuck I'm trying to say, that style of paying is if most of our employees are going to long-term be in one position, we need to have things that they can strive for while staying in that position. Again, in our business in Serene Clean, we don't do lead cleaners. We don't do anything like that because we don't run teams. So if you run teams, that may work. You may have some upward mobility within the actual field work. But for us, we don't. And so that is one of the reasons that for me, paying like a percentage of the job or paying a flat rate per job or anything like that, which is much more easily done on an IC level. And it gets really complicated when you're charging hourly as well to be paying a percentage or be paying a flat rate. It gets way more challenging charging hourly, which is what we do. So, and the reason I'm kind of like giving all of these caveats before we actually get into thing is, as you can see, how you charge can wildly affect how you pay and if it makes sense. We charge hourly For residential, we pay hourly for residential. We charge flat rate for commercial, and we still pay hourly for commercial. And all of these things can work. It just can change things. And why don't I pay percentage? Why don't I pay a flat rate for commercial? Well, all of my commercial cleaners have been trained to be able to jump into a house if necessary. And a lot of our commercial cleaners are actually, in fact, hybrid cleaners. So now all of a sudden they're doing residential and they're doing commercial, and things get more complicated then from a payroll perspective. Keeping it simple, stupid, and keeping it all hourly is a lot easier. And then there's no, well, what am I going to be making hourly? Quick break. If you run a cleaning business, this is for you. The Maid Summit 2025 is the go-to virtual event to elevate your systems, grow your team, and finally get out of the day-to-day. 20 plus speakers, real results, and absolutely zero cost to you. Register today at maidsummit.com. Remember, it's free. Okay, now back to the video. Another detractor of paying for performance model is that a lot of the people who are going to be applying and working for us are used to being paid an hourly job. So say they're looking for jobs on Indeed. It either says an hourly wage range or it says a flat rate, like you can make up to $1,000 a week. And then when you bring them on and trying to explain from a financial perspective, like how much they're going to make, even if they're going to make more on the pay for performance model, a lot of times they don't like the uneasiness of not knowing, right? Not knowing explicitly, like I am working this many hours. This is how much I'm going to make. This is what I can expect for raises. And just like there is something incredibly comforting of having clarity and having it all explicitly spelled out. And we've definitely seen this in our techs, even just since implementing this, and we were already paying hourly. So coming back to the whole stagnation thing of why do we have such a wide wage range when it comes to what our techs can make? It's so that they feel like they're having something to strive towards and there is no stagnation in their performance for years and years and years. Not saying it can't happen, but it's not going to happen from a wage perspective, where if, you start paying them 35 or 40 or 42% of the appointment price from day one, well, you can never go higher than that. You may be able to go bonuses and stuff, but from like an industry perspective, nobody's going to recommend you pay W-2 employees more than that because that's their take home, right? That is their wage. What about all of the other things that go into costs of having employees and paying them? I'm talking about the insurance costs, the payroll costs, if you want to do bonuses, if you ever want to do benefits, all of these things come into play. Like when we're talking about a compensation package, it's not just strictly what is the hourly rate or what is the take home pay. All of these other things do add a lot of value. And this is where talking to your techs and being willing to adjust and reflect on what is it that they actually want. And the reason it's taken several years for us to get to this higher wage, because you might be like, Stephanie, you totally could afford to have paid them up to 25 an hour like several years ago. You're right. If I hadn't introduced all of the benefits that had been requested, that was an absolute strategic decision of like, I remember having that conversation and saying, okay, we can either raise the wages or we can introduce these benefits. What do you guys want? And then coming back and none of them saying a higher wage. They wanted a 401k. They wanted additional stuff related to car care and reimbursement for gas and all of these things, meaning higher reimbursement for gas. I already was doing that, right? So, and making that more fair and feasible, and higher mileage pay, meaning while they're driving, because that was on a lower amount as well. So this is where you need to not just blindly follow what anybody on the internet is saying. You can absolutely take advice, but we need to be malleable. We need to be able to try things and adjust and not feel like because someone else is doing it this way, that's the way I have to do. I want you guys to critically think about how do you charge and what is the structure that's going to make sense for you. And if you do pay for performance, maybe don't start out with like the highest being 42% of the appointment, right? Because then there's nowhere to go from there. And especially if you don't ever anticipate having a ton of upwards mobility from a position standpoint, maybe that's not the way to go. It can work really beautifully. It also can increase people's, speed and efficiency and things like that. So when it comes to profit, that's great. And also, as long as you have some type of, if you get a complaint, you're knocked down to this percentage or some type of caveat like that, it can work really, really beautifully. But I've had many consulting sessions with folks who actually came back from that version and went back to hourly. And I also had a conversation. What was the interview that I did where the gentleman said that like after a certain amount of cleaners, it made sense to come back to hourly? Of course, I can picture him. Is the person who I couldn't pronounce his name, Ken Carfagno. He talked about his buddy who, once he got to like 25, 30 folks on the team, it just kind of fell apart when paying like a flat rate or percentage for the work and switching back to hourly. Again, especially from hiring post, people like knowing what it's going to be hourly because then they can compare and it doesn't feel like, well, what am I going to be making every week or whatever? Again, can be done. I know I am 15 minutes into this before even talking about ours, but I just want you guys to think about this and also critically look at like longevity of your wage guidelines and how you expect to do this. Of like, if you're opening and you're starting out the gate at this super high wage, which again, that's a great thing. But if they have nothing to like strive for, it really just, it makes you kind of apathetic, especially when you're not going to be getting a promotion, right? And another way to like kind of build this in is you could have, cleaning tech 1, cleaning tech 2, all of these types of things. But for me, I expect all of my cleaners to be able to like perform well out of training, whether they're a newbie or been with me 4 years, like they're all held to the same standard. So I guess that's just more, frankly, that is a psychological title that you can then tie to, raises, or you could just do it this way and it be kind of time-based and based on their behavior and things like that. So again, lots of ways to skin this cat before I go into this. And I'm definitely not poo-pooing on pay for performance, but there is some negatives. It's not this perfect system, just like there's negatives here. Paying hourly can get challenging at times because, there's not a huge incentive to haul ass at cleanings, right? For us and how we kind of circumvent that and how I always have is every single appointment, they have their approved number of hours that they must stay in. They cannot go over that without explicit approval from the office, an explanation from them as to why it's happening. Because we charge hourly and we pay hourly, it's very important that they stay within the approved time. And how do we know what that approved time is? Well, of course, that's where doing audits on production rates, meaning how fast does your typical cleaner clean? How long do first times take? How long do maintenance cleans take? And having that range. And so again, all of this is influenced because when we're quoting out projects, we're giving them a range of what that upper price is going to be. And if it comes in lower, we're only charging them for that actual time. Again, I know that there's more profitable ways for maintenance cleans, 100%, but this is simple. And considering a huge amount of our clientele do limited hour cleans because it's a budgetary thing, it just makes it a lot easier to say, you bought 3 hours, what's the priority list, as opposed to changing the scope of work every time. So again, this is all kind of like, I know it seems like I'm all over the place, but these things are very interconnected in our cleaning businesses. And that's why I'm even talking about how do you charge could potentially influence how are you going to pay. It's very easy to charge an hourly and pay an hourly, right? It's very simple. If you are charging hourly and paying a percentage or a flat rate, that's very complicated. And I would not recommend that way. I think that that's probably going to get complicated for you. But, if you charge flat rate and pay hourly, that can absolutely work. Obviously, we do that on commercial. They just are, approved for a certain amount of hours and they just have to get that dictates how fast they're going to go. And for us, because we sell on detail, like they're approved up to that time. Like if they get through their normal stuff, they can either ask us if they've checked all of their work, they can leave early at a commercial account, or they can work on extra detail stuff. And that's from like a client satisfaction and longevity. So for me, I would much rather my cleaners be doing like detail work up to that approved time. Like say this office building, we're approved for up to 4 hours based on our bid. And that is a flat rate. And we estimated that they could get everything done, and say they could get it done in 3 hours and 45 minutes to do what is expected. they could leave sometimes. We're fine with that. But if they take an extra 15 minutes and really go in on some details, to me, that's a longevity thing. I want that client to be dazzled, and they're going to probably keep us because we're so detailed. And I'm very willing to give up that little bit of profit, and make sure that the place is just looking spectacular. So that's just my 2 cents and how my philosophy on things. And it's totally okay if you're like, no, I want to milk as much profit out of this thing. We're going to do whatever is passable to the client and move on. And that is 100% valid. And, I've had guests on this podcast who run things that way. And again, totally valid, and it's not a wrong way of thinking. It's just different than what I think. All of this caveats to be said, guys, let's get into this. So previous to introducing this method into Serene Clean earlier this year, what we had been doing is basically giving raises on vibes, giving raises when it felt appropriate. And we explicitly said raises do not coincide necessarily with performance reviews, because we were still doing performance reviews on a yearly basis. Obviously, checking in with newbies much more frequently than that. But then on a yearly basis, you are having a traditional performance review where we sit down, we talk about, the past year, what we can work on for the next year, how we are doing for them. That's very important to go over that in the performance review. And it's a huge chunk of the conversation actually, is how they feel about the workplace and any suggestions that they have. Some great ideas have came from those conversations with techs at these performance reviews. So remember, performance review is also reviewing your performance as an employer. So keep that in mind. That's very important. It's not just, sitting there and wagging your finger at them. We had been doing that already. But again, it truly was giving raises based on how us managers were feeling in the moment. And, it's not like those feelings were not based on fact, but it just wasn't very scientific. And it could be, in a lot of ways, unfair now that I look back at it, meaning, well, we gave them, like, say we have 2 techs, right? And we gave somebody a good sized bump. They were doing great, being consistent. And another person, maybe we gave them slightly less of a big bump, 3 months later, looking at this other tech, because we had nothing to really go off. I was like, oh yeah, they should get a raise, and like, here's $1 more or something like that. And it was totally off of what we were feeling. And I'm not saying feelings aren't valid or that feelings cannot come into play, of course, when making decisions in our business. But when it comes to other people's income, no, I don't think so. And so that's something reflecting back on, that people were getting great raises. I oftentimes was giving raises like $1 at a time. And that's something that actually we have like backed down on. And you'll see once I go through this, that is really not the case, but it is all spelled out as to what exactly the raise is going to be. And it's not all over the place. So this has really introduced consistency that was absolutely lacking previously when it came to raises and how we judged if somebody deserved a raise. And that's really what the crux of the issue was, is we were just judging internally. Do we feel this person is deserving of a raise? And if so, how much? And there was no rhyme or reason to it across the board from like a scalability and company-wide perspective. And that's really what this comes down to, is we wanted it to be completely fair. Like, I want our raise schedule to be completely fair. And additionally, we really didn't, we had all of our policies that they signed, but it felt very just kind of passive as to what is going to cause them to get the raise or not. And it just wasn't explicitly spelled out. And that was the goal of this performance review and wage guidelines document, was we want to put the ball into the cleaning tech's court. Yeah, that's the saying, right? We wanted to put the ball into their court of, your wage is 100% in your control. We wanted it to be empowering and not feel like here's management lording over you and we'll decide when you get a raise, right? I didn't want that to be the case anymore. And even if it wasn't intentional, that very well could have been how it was feeling to folks, of like, well, I feel like I'm deserving of a raise. And they could come to us and request a raise. That would happen. And we would almost always give it, right? Unless they just gotten a raise. That happened a couple times where people just got a huge raise, and then a month later, after, some performance issues, they needed more money. So they come to us for a raise. And we've turned that down, of course, like, hey, you just got this and you've been acting like this, right? And it was just very uncomfortable. where this takes all guesswork out of it. Additionally, it allows us to hold them way more accountable. And that was, I would say, the secondary. So there's really three goals of this review and wage guideline revamp that we did this year. Number one was to put the ball in their court and to empower them to feel like they are in control of how fast and how much of a raise that they are going to get, and explicitly explain what that's going to look like. We also wanted to be able to hold them more accountable. And then I guess the third one really is like spelling out explicitly how much, like to the cent, is it going to affect your raise potential when you do this behavior? And then just every time that they did the behavior that we are not looking for, we're like, okay, this is affecting this. And it's like tying their action to the consequence without any emotion, like, okay, you've chosen to do this or you've done this. And so this is how that's going to affect your raise potential next year. And, they could still not care, or it still maybe is like not enough to make them perhaps change their actions very much, but at least it's doing something of like immediate, action and consequence. And it's just very obvious to them. And again, it's on them then. It's not on us being meanies or anything like that. Like, they know what they're doing. And remember, these are fully capable adults. Let's not patronize or act like they're incapable of making decisions. Our staff are very smart, right? So if we can just respect them and spell it out, like, I feel like this just, it feels very respectful to have this spelled out. And it just made us feel kind of like a proper workplace that wasn't just flying by the seat of our pants when it came to this, especially considering now we're several years in. That's another aspect of this, is we weren't starting everybody out necessarily at the same wage. Because when I started, we were starting people out at $12 an hour. So all of a sudden, we've had techs who for years have been with us, and they started out lower, and they've been getting raises like it's the Wild West, and there's literally no rhyme or reason to it. And so we really wanted to just create some structure where there wasn't any previously, and like kind of have a line in the sand of like, okay, this is where things are changing. This is what it's going to look like. And all of our techs who have been with us long term, they understand that starting wages have risen. They don't have a problem with that. They understand, and they want that. They're all making, more, of course, than what the newbies are making coming in. So that's not a problem. And that's definitely a thing I would not suggest is ever hiring somebody that would be making more starting out than what your seasoned techs are making. Obviously, bad look, totally unfair. So make sure that when you are implementing things, think about it from that perspective too, of like, oh, is this going to push them higher than where our older techs are? So keep that in mind as well. So all of that to be said, that was the goals and what we wanted to achieve from implementing this change. So all of that to be said, 27 minutes into this, I'm going to start reading through this, guys, and stopping, pausing, and explaining what that's going to look like. So this is a 6-page document that we have. And the first page is going to just have a little chart that is the raise timeline and raise potential just summarized so that they can see, okay, 60 days after hire, all the way up to the 9-year anniversary, what is the raise potential at that time increment? And the first paragraph, I'll just read it for you. Serene Clean performance reviews and wage guidelines. Raises are provided 60 days after hire, 90 days after hire, and then all raises after that will be aligned with performance evaluations, which occur on or after each staff member's work anniversary. Evaluations will cover the period from one anniversary date to the next, with raises applied retroactively from the day after the anniversary to the day of the review. So even thinking there, you might be like, that's really specific. Well, a lot of times we just logistically cannot get to a performance review on the day of their anniversary. It might be a weekend, might be a day that they have off, or it just doesn't make sense in the schedule to pull them from a cleaning to do that. So when we're doing performance reviews, we're just finding natural gaps in their schedule or having to actually like reassign a cleaning. So it's kind of a big deal. So that may happen a week after their anniversary date. So what's going to happen is whatever raise that they get at that performance review, we're going to backdate that to and pay them the difference of what it would be from their actual anniversary date. Again, trying to be as fair as possible. and really show we're trying to be fair. We're trying to make as much sense as possible to them. And the reason we're doing the 60 days after hire, 90 days after hire, we want them to get to that a higher wage relatively quickly in their journey with us, to give them a little, dopamine boost. And also they have rapidly changed since they came on with us, right? So again, our starting wage is $16 an hour. And that is negotiable, just so you know, like if somebody requests a hire and we really want them, it's not like we won't go up to, I think the highest we'll go up to as a starting wage is like $17.50. But only they have to, really impress us and we want them. And again, because we want everybody to be in the same kind of range when they're starting out. And because, previous cleaning experience doesn't really matter to us. It's more like, do we really like this person? Do we think that they would be a good fit from a core values and just a work ethic and being a good person standpoint, right? So we hit them with a raise immediately at 60 days and then 90 days as well, just to give them those little boosts and to settle in for the next year at a good wage, right? And something to look forward to at the 1-year anniversary. Because again, that first year, they're really learning a lot. They're really adapting. And honestly, most people, if they're going to leave, it's going to be within the first year. I've found like that's when the most turnover happens. So frankly, I don't want them to be at 25 an hour and then I get 6 months out of them. Like I want them to have something to strive to, and also something that they're settling into this like it's a career that you can kind of climb the wage ladder, if you will. So, and that is, obviously going to be rewarded by all of the behaviors that we are going to be showcasing in this document. So again, we have the little chart that says the raise timeline, 60 days, 90 days, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, all the way up to 9 year. And on the right-hand side of that column is going to be the actual dollar amount. So 60 days after hire, they can have up to $1 an hour raise potential. And all of them are pretty much getting that. 90 days after hire, another 25 cents. So that's going to bring them up to $17.25, 90 days. And then at 1 year, we have another 75 cent out per hour raise potential. So that would get them up to 18 after a year. And then from there, we go up 75 cents an hour per year, except at the 5-year anniversary, which we jump them to $1.75 an hour at that 5 year. Because for us, like that's a very long time, and we want to really like give them a big bump potentially at the 5-year anniversary, because that's huge if somebody makes it to that. And then from there on, again, 75 cents per hour every single year. And when it came to like how we decided these numbers, I leaned heavily onto my managers. Actually, exclusively, this was based on their experiences, because all of them had worked in a corporate environment before. Stephanie had not. I mean, I worked at a credit union, like a local credit union, when I was like 20. But that really just, it wasn't the same. All of my managers have been in very professional settings where these were careers that they were in. And so previously I had been giving like, $1 or $1.50 an hour, like bumps, like every single time. And they're like, listen, that's great. It's unusual though. And is it really sustainable if we want to have them, again, having things to strive for long-term from a income perspective, then maybe we draw this out more. And they're like, listen, like if we got a 75 cent an hour raise every single year, like that would be fantastic where I was working. Like that was good. And obviously, they have bonuses, they have tips, they have great benefits here. So all of these things go into the compensation package. So keep that in mind when you're laying yours out. If you choose to go this route, like you can do whatever amounts you want. This is just what we went off of. And again, this was me not as the boss even really having anything to say about this, because I'm not knowledgeable on this of like what is fair. I have no bearing. And frankly, this is going to sound, once you start like making, a salary, I have no idea what I make hourly, right? As the owner, like that's totally not even in my mind. So if any of you watched like Arrested Development, which is a great show, and one of the like most memeable quotes of the whole show is like, it's one banana. What could it be? $10? Like, like that, as ridiculous as that sounds, once you get to a certain level in your business, that's what starts to happen is like, is this good? Is this bad? Because you're no longer like making or behaving like a tech anymore. And so this is where I kind of step aside and say, my brain doesn't know. Okay. My brain does not know, is this good enough? Is this bad? So this is where I ask people who have been in more traditional settings and say, hey, what is normal here? What is good considering all of these other factors of the compensation model? So I'm not saying I'm, at $10 a banana being cheap levels or anything like that. That's definitely not what I'm saying. However, point being is you may not be the expert here as to what is fair and appropriate. So ask those who have more knowledge, who have more experience when it comes to this of what is fair and right. People may in the comments be like, that's terrible. This is a terrible thing. That's okay. All of my staff really like this and they're very happy with the wages, especially in rural Wisconsin. So keeping that in mind I know that at some point this is probably going to piss somebody off. Like, this is how we're doing it. That's okay. I want to put it out for those that are actually watching this to get value. So it is what it is. So that is the first page. We also put down on this page, the maximum hourly wage for cleaning technicians is $25 an hour with potential for increases. Just knowing that we can always adapt this in the future. Maybe we get everybody to 10 years they've been with us and we need to revamp this, right? Or maybe we've added a bunch of benefits at that point too. And they're pleased with that. Because again, if somebody's making $25 an hour with like a full benefits package in our area as a cleaning technician, like that's stellar. So keep that in mind of like what is appropriate. These are not independent contractors, guys, right? They are employees. Totally different things when we're talking about how to pay people. So keep that in mind. Keep it in mind where my business is and what is competitive wages in my area. Working anywhere without like a college degree and not working there for years and making $25 an hour in our area, like meaning Wisconsin, in rural Wisconsin is very good. It's a good wage. And again, maybe inflation goes crazy and all of these things can be changed. All of our documents can be changed at any moment, right? So this is what makes sense now. In 5 to 10 years, maybe we need to adjust. Maybe we need to adjust next year or tomorrow because something happens. Okay. Raises will be based upon the employee's quality of work, company policy compliance, as well as attendance and punctuality. Further clarification provided within the next 5 pages of this document. And this is where we get into the bread and butter. Really, page 2 is like what I'm going to be focusing on because page 3 through 6 is literally a chart explaining from a dollars and cents amount explicitly what is the potential for a raise at each tiered raise potential, meaning if they're up for potentially 25 cents an hour, 75 cents an hour, $1 per hour, or $1.75 per hour, we literally have a chart spelling out how much each violation in each area of this policy is going to be deducted from that potential raise. Like, it is explicit. And maybe I'll put in some imagery next to me on the YouTube video of this so that you guys can see what that looks like, because it's kind of hard to describe charts and things like that, but we'll put that in there. I'll make sure that we added that in here for you. So page 2 is going to be explaining exactly how the compensation breakdown for the total amount of potential raises will be calculated. So I sat down with my managers and we really discussed like what is important to us and what do we look for when we are deciding upon raises and behavior and performance and things like that. So we break down our compensation, potential into 3 areas. 1 is going to be quality of work. 2 is going to be company policy compliance. And then 3 is attendance and punctuality. These are the 3 areas that we are going to be judging somebody on for their raises. And not even judging, just like watching how they behave, right? Because they already know all the policies. They're in the driver's seat here. So quality of work is going to be responsible for 50% of the potential of the raise, because for us, like, quality of work is huge. If we're getting complaints on somebody, like, this is a huge issue. If QCs are not going well, like being that the basis of all of Serene Clean's success is on having high quality of work, that is why 50% of the raise potential is based on that. Number 2, company policy compliance. 40% of the raise potential is based on this. And then the last 10%, that's attendance and punctuality. And I know that that might be shocking to you. And you're like, how can that not be bigger? But for us, company policy compliance is vast and broad, and it covers literally so many things. Because when we looked at the headaches that we were getting from our staff members, or when we looked at folks who did not work out, they were so non-compliant with all of the company policies that we had laid out. And this covers so many things, and I'll get into that momentarily, but it really is like, we're like, that's actually the biggest problem. And frankly, when we look at our behavior at Serene Clean over the past 6 years, because that's what we did, we critically looked at how do we actually behave as managers when it comes to, disciplining or having some kind of action upon a staff member. Attendance, do we ever fire somebody over poor attendance? Very rarely. And it is 100% a fact that most of our staff members are going to call in at least once a month. Like 100%. They are almost all parents, and they are almost all the primary parent, and they are responsible for when their kid is sick and they can't go to daycare or what have you. Like, they're the ones who are going to have to go deal with that. And so for us, we're like, we never are going to really punish somebody for that. We'll note it if they're having attendance issues 100%, and that will affect their raise. But it just is not that's not a deal breaker for me, honestly. And I'm totally cool if somebody calls in only once a month. That's great. As a full-time staff member, I am pleased as punch with that. So we just didn't want it to really affect their raises. And obviously, if they're calling on all the time, this is meaning multiple times a week or 5 times a month, well, then they just might not be a good fit for us as a person. And we're, right to work state, that can be a reason for termination is poor attendance. And we have absolutely fired people for that. It's just so much more likely to be quality of work. But really, the most likely reason somebody's getting fired is company policy compliance. They are being non-compliant, and they know it, and they know what they should be doing, and they're not doing it. They are acting unprofessional, or all of the other things that fall under the umbrella of company policy compliance. So, I'm going to now go through each section. So quality of work, company policy compliance, and attendance and punctuality, what the expectations and standards, as well as how many violations are going to disqualify them from that component of the raise. So what this is going to look like is, again, let's think of a pie, right? I like to do a pie analogy. So 100% of the raise is 100% of the pie. Half of that pie is related to quality. 40% of that pie is related to company policy compliance. And then the last 10% slice is punctuality and attendance. So as they have violations in each section of that pie, a chunk of that pie potential is taken away. So as they have complaints or QCs and things like that, we're taking away chunks of that till there's nothing left, right? And each of those categories have different amounts tied to that. So for us, 50% of the compensation raise potential is going to be related to quality of work. In that slice of the pie, if they have 5 violations in 1 calendar year from their last performance review, that will disqualify them completely from getting any of that part of the raise, if that makes sense. I know that this might get a little complicated without visually seeing it, but I'm trying to visualize it for you. So if they have 5 complaints in a year, all of a sudden, half of that raise potential is gone. They no longer can get it. And honestly, that's a lot of complaints. So we're probably having, there's other discussions that are being had, but this is strictly when it comes to raise potential, right? So going into quality of work. Regular quality checks will be conducted with failures clearly documented. Subsequent failures in the same area will count as violations. Each instance of below standard performance counts as 1 violation. So they basically get a freebie in each area where it's like a warning. And so if they have a complaint again so they get a complaint on their floors, right? That's not going to affect their raise because we want them to be able to learn and not get that slap on the wrist immediately. But then they get complaint on the floors again. Now all of a sudden they were just told about that, right? So now that's where it's going to affect their wage. So a client complaint that reflects the cleaning technician not meeting a quality performance standard counts as 1 violation. So there's a difference between a complaint and, for us, a quality check too. A client cancellation due to cleaning quality removes the entire quality component of the raise. So if somebody cancels because they were so appalled by the quality, then your quality potential for this year, it's gone, right? Because that's a huge deal. If we lose a client because of a quality complaint, that is to us just an egregious sin at Serene Clean. So that's why we're focusing on that. And then finally, 5 violations in this area will disqualify the quality component of the raise. So that's everything related to quality of work. Again, it's super important to us. That's why it's 50% of the total potential raise. So again, if they get a QC and, then they have subsequent failures on that same particular type of cleaning task, that's when that's going to count as a violation, right? So whereas a complaint is a complaint, that's what's going to happen there. All right. So that's quality of work. Number 2, 40% of the total potential raise is company policy compliance. And a couple of bulleted points into this. All signed policies and company expectations must be followed, including but not limited to dress code, tool use, conduct, picking up and returning keys appropriately, and responding to management messages and requests. Each instance of violating policies and expectations will count as 1 violation, and 4 violations in this area will disqualify this component of the raise. So they can have 4 issues per year in the company policy compliance before they're just not getting any of that. Each issue is going to chomp away at that piece of the pie. And then once they hit 4, boom, that whole piece of the pie is gone potentially. So what this does for us and why we listed these things out, right? Dress code, tool use, conduct, picking up and returning keys appropriately, and responding to management messages and requests. These were all of the areas that we just consistently have had just so many frustrations with cleaning techs not behaving in the way that they are supposed to and have agreed to, right? So things like, not responding to management messages, requests, like just leaving us on red, like say they get a complaint or we ask them an explicit question, they just don't respond. I know that that's an issue for you guys, right? So we're calling it out, and that like that's not okay. It's inappropriate to do that. We expect a response within a reasonable time frame, of course. Like obviously, we're not texting them at 10 o'clock at night expecting a response or anything like that. But that is the expectation, that we are communicating effectively. And communication is such, I would say ongoing, one of the biggest issues that we've had at Serene Clean is lack of proper communication. And we try to communicate as best as possible. And so, if we mess up, we always own up to it from a man, like, hey, I did not tell you this. I'm trying to get you the information as soon as possible, blah, blah, blah. And really being, casting a critical eye on us of we can't expect great communication if we do not give great communication, right? So make sure, you're looking in the mirror when you're expecting people to do things, right? And own your mistakes when you make them. However, this was such an issue of just, they're not communicating well. They're not picking up and returning keys appropriately. The important notes and the key pickup notes that have just been added to ZenMaid, this is going to help our techs be more successful, right? Because then this is when I was telling ZenMaid, this is a problem. This is a huge problem and it's always going to be a problem, right? And obviously we don't want to hold our customers' keys as much as possible, but for commercial accounts, potentially Airbnbs, this is just what needs to happen. Sometimes we have to hold keys, right? And so if this is something that we have to do, this is an issue where the techs, they get to it, they forgot to pick it up, or more often than not, they forgot to return it. And then the next time a cleaning rolls around and we realize it's on a different tech for whatever reason, now all of a sudden, it's just pure chaos for us to hunt down that key. So it's such a frustrating and disruptive experience to not have the keys back where they need to be. This is a huge problem. And so shout out to ZenMaid for the new keynote thing. So basically on the day for your cleaners, when they're looking at their appointments, instead of having to go into the appointments to read the key information, as long as you put it in the client notes properly, it will show outside of the individual appointments. It'll literally be a thing right at the top of their day. It's like, hey, you need to return this key, right? So, or you need to pick up these keys, you need to return this key. So very excited. It's actually going to help our techs be more successful here and not make it so hard on them. So really looking at how can we make our techs more successful? That's what, and make their day easier and make everything just run more smoothly. That's really where ZenMaid is focused on when it comes to features, is what's going to make us operate more smoothly, right? And that is a big one. So very excited about that. So, dress code, tool use, that might be crazy to you, tool use, but we were so sick of people improperly using tools that they have been trained on, and certain things in our kits could damage things and they know not to use them on certain surfaces or what have you. So if they're continually making mistakes related to that, that can cause a lot of issues for us. Conduct, obviously that covers a lot of things and it's covered in the code of conduct. And so all of the things that they have signed, we have so many documents. I think we have like 19 or 20 new hire documents that they sign. And, so all of these is going to be something that we can point to as they are in violation. And we go over these so explicitly in orientation, and they're reminded of these things. So it's not like we're pulling the wool over, right? So that's the thing, is like, we're reminding, we're talking about what this looks like and what the expectations are. So they know what they should be doing, right? And then finally, the final little 10% chunk is going to be attendance and punctuality. So refer to the attendance policy for standards. So that is company policy compliance, but we don't want to basically spell out another whole policy in a policy. That just felt like silly. So we're like, just refer to this. The amount of violations in this area that will disqualify this component of the raises will vary depending on the raise potential. See page 3 to 5 for more details, because we couldn't actually say how many. This was like a math thing. And like, that meme with like the lady and all the numbers, like this was us, like this was Crystal trying to figure out like, how does this work? Right? Like from a math perspective of like, it always makes sense always. And it didn't make sense unless we said it this way. So that's what that looks like, and I'll explain that in a moment. So management reserves the right to withhold any portion of a raise. So if somebody acts like egregiously, let's say company policy compliance, right? And they do only one violation, but they fucked up so badly, we're like, no, like you do not get this portion of the raise. You're lucky you're even still working here, like depending on what it is. And obviously if it's something really crazy, we're going to fire them for it. But say they really, really they messed up. Right. They messed up so badly, then, they don't get to have that portion of the raise. And again, we get to reserve the right for that. Right. And we will never, ever, ever abuse that rule, but we just want to have that caveat in place. And that's really what all of these documents are about, is like having caveats in place that we can fall back to in the event of an extreme situation. 99.9% of the time, it's never an extreme situation, but you want to have that at least written down and agreed to, so that when the crazy stuff happens, you have something to point to, right? And then bonuses are at the owner's discretion and may follow similar criteria as raises, because that's where we really wanted to leave that to be open-ended, because I exclusively am the one who makes decisions on bonuses. That is still 100% within my jurisdiction, if you will. So that can be Christmas bonuses, other bonuses, Christmas and July bonuses when the business is doing well enough to do that. Those are based on my discretion. And I'm looking at these same things, but mostly I'm looking at longevity. So how long has somebody been with me? I look at what I gave them last year for Christmas, right? And I always am upping that. That's just my personal preference of like, I want to up everybody. Like honestly, this is what I do. I take whatever I gave them last year for a Christmas bonus. And if they've been, I bump it up by $50 to $100, depending on if they're part-time or full-time. If they're part-time, I'm probably doing $50. If they're full-time, I'm going to give them like $100 more. And I just increase that every single year, because the business should be hypothetically growing. And if they've been with me for 5 years, yes, they should be getting a much heftier bonus than somebody who just started, 6 months ago, right? So I try to be, again, as fair as possible, knowing people can talk, obviously, and they will look a gift horse in the mouth, but I do try to be as fair as possible. So then see page 3 to 5 for further clarification regarding raise guidelines. And this is where let's pop, that image again up here so you guys can see what this looks like. It's just a big chart, and on each section is going to be dependent on the potential for the raise that year. So 25 cents, 75 cents, $1 or $1.75. Those are the amounts that we have specified on that first page that they could be getting that year, right? So only one instance is there a chance to get 25 cents for a raise, and that's after, 9 months? Yep. 9 months. 90 days after hire there, that's where that little bump is going to come up to get them to that 18. Ideally, if they're starting at 16, right? So that's the only time, but we still need to spell out like each portion of that, 25 cents, right? So let me go to $1 to make this easy. So we have these several charts that are broken into the 3 different parts of the pie, right? So quality of work is 50% of the total raise. So if you are on a year that you are up for $1 an hour, or you're at a moment where you're up for $1 an hour, which is really, I think, just going to be that first raise. But for quality of work, you can have up to 5 violations, and one violation and then it spells it out specifically from a cents perspective. One violation, 10 cents an hour deducted from potential raise. 2 violations, 20 cents an hour deducted from potential raises. 3, 30, 4, 40, 5, 50, and a client cancellation due to cleaning quality removes the entire quality component of the raise, 50 cents an hour deducted from the potential raise. So what this means is when they are on when they are at the moment that they are up for potentially $1 an hour, that year, it's that time, and they say they have 4 violations, 40 cents an hour will be deducted from that potential raise, right? Because if $1 is available, they just lost 40 cents of that potential dollar because they had 4 violations. If they have 5, 50 cents an hour deducted from potential raise, like the whole chunk is, because 50 cents is 50% of the total potential raise. And I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but this is the only way to explain it. So I hope that makes sense. Company policy compliance, 40% of total raise. So they can have up to 4 violations. So if they get 4 violations, the 40 cents that was available to them for this potential raise is now gone. Right? So this is literally how we're calculating it. Attendance and punctuality, which is 10% of the total raise. If they have 1 violation, 2 cents an hour deducted for potential raise. 5 violations, 10 cents an hour is deducted from potential raise, right? So this is why this had to happen. So 10% of the total potential raise, if they're looking at $1, is going to be 10 cents, right? So what we had to do is how many violations make it to that 10 cents an hour. So 5 violations would get you to the whole 10 cents is gone. So that number changes depending on how much raise potential we're looking at. Whereas if we're looking at $1.75, they can have up to 7 violations in attendance and punctuality, which would take away that portion of the raise, which would be 17 cents an hour based on the math of 10% of $1.75, right? So that's where things get into the weeds. But, and I know that this might be like, oh my gosh, this is so complicated. It's really not once you have it spelled out, right? And this way, when we are actually looking at calculating the raise, like Crystal's preparing for the performance review, all she needs to do is go back to our documentation of their behavior, which we literally have a spreadsheet in our Google Drive that's named every single employee. And every time they do one of these things, we just put it on that spreadsheet with the date, what happened, right? And so then when Crystal is like, okay, it's Sally's performance review time. What did she do this past year? Boom. How much was she up for? Oh, she was up for $1 at this performance review. Well, she had 2 violations in here. Let's use this actual example here. Sally is up for her performance review, and the raise potential this year is $1 an hour. Sally had 2 complaints over the past year. She did great, right? So that's quality of work. Let's say she had 3 company policy compliance, and let's say she had 5 attendance and punctuality violations. So to this example, she had 3 violations of quality of work. She is going to have 30 cents an hour deducted from potential raise. So $1 minus 30, we are down to 70 cents total that she could potentially get right now. Now, she had 4 violations in company policy compliance. So which is 40 cents an hour. So now we have that 70 cents that was remaining after the quality of work. 70 minus 40 is going to be, she now can get 30 cents of a raise. Okay. And attendance and punctuality, she had 5 violations, 10 cents an hour deducted from potential raise. So now 30 minus another 10 cents, she's only getting a 20-cent raise because of her behavior. And I know that seems really strict, but we're expecting excellence. And if you're having this many violations in all of these different areas, then should you really be getting a big raise? Or, maybe you need to, not maybe, you need to be adjusting things, right? That's the goal. And so this really spells out. So when, doing Sally's performance raise, it's like, okay, like there's no question here. It's like you did this, these are your actions caused this to occur, right? And it's just so cut and dry. It takes out any anger or hopefully animosity. Yeah, they may be angry at the policy, but really it should be more disappointment in themselves because their actions are what dictated this. And it is explicitly explained down to the penny how it's going to affect the raise. And so once they get to that first performance review and this happens based on their actions, hopefully it is, man in the mirror time and saying, okay, I'm responsible for what my raise is going to be coming up. So I'm going to either adjust my actions or expect this to keep happening every year based on my behavior. And honestly, looking at my longest texts, they have so few instances of all of this stuff. So they're just excellent at their job. They're very excellent at what they do, and they just don't do this shit, right? They don't do this shit, so they get that raise. They get that raise every single year. And so they're going to climb as quickly as they possibly can up to that high amount. For example, some of my techs say they're 3 or 4 years in right now because they've been grandfathered in. They're already at, 21 an hour. Well, we're just going to follow this until they get to that 25. So it's not going to take them obviously 9 years to get there, but that's what it's going to do, right? So it grandfathers the folks in who have already been at a different amount than where the schedule was laid out here. So honestly, this is so useful. And what this forces you to do is it forces you to document correctly. It forces you to document like a proper HR department is supposed to document. And I know that sounds like a lot of work on your part. Tough, guys. That's part of managing people. If you don't want to put in the work of managing people, then you need to not have, people to manage and just work for yourself. Like this is the shitty part about being a small business is that's very overwhelming. But what I will say is if you can put into place, even from an early on stage, when you hire somebody, just simply make the spreadsheet. And I have this template available where it's basically the employee documentation. And we have a little drop down. It's like the date is one column. The drop down is what did they do? What kind of violation? And then describe what happened, right? And who is this being documented by? So that at the end of the year, you can have something to look back at. And so all it takes is in that moment when something happens, whether that just be screenshotting it and sending it to yourself, emailing it to yourself. That honestly, I find it easiest to like screenshot and email if you're out in the field and something happens and you don't want to forget. Immediately screenshot that, send an email to yourself or set a reminder for yourself to get back to it so that when you're sitting down at your computer, you have stuff to work through of like, okay, these 3 cleaners did these 3 different things. And when it happens, you don't have to think about anything other than dealing with it in the moment. But then from a documentation standpoint, you can then just work through it in your email of like, okay, I have these 3 things to document real quick. All I need to do is this. And you can even attach, like we like to attach the screenshots and everything so that we have all the stuff properly documented. And then when it comes to like unemployment claims or when you need to fire somebody, you are already documenting it properly because you should be doing this anyway. Take all of the shit that I'm talking about right now when it comes to raises. You should be documenting all of these issues anyway. And honestly, this is one of the worst parts, in my opinion, of owning a business and managing people is this administrative stuff. And that's where, a VA can come in, a manager can come in of like, if you have anybody outside of yourself right now that's assisting in the business, this is a perfect thing for them to be doing. Where if you're communicating directly with your cleaners and something happens, screenshot it, send it to this other person. And I know a lot of you don't have that, but that is a perfectly reasonable thing to expect some other administrative person to be doing is documenting this stuff. Obviously, I have an HR director who is handling this, but we're a bigger team, right? So you can work in baby steps. If you don't have anybody, either way, guys, it's going to save you so much headache to be documenting this stuff. Like, you need to be doing this because otherwise you sit down and you know that this person has been a shitbag to you and they've been a terrible employee, but all of a sudden you're sifting through months of text messages that maybe even a messenger app, they even deleted shit, right? And so you're trying to find all this documentation when you're finally fed up enough and you need to fire them or whatever is happening, right? Or they're trying to get unemployment and they've violated document policies. And now you have to find all of this stuff and this proof. It's just so much easier to do it as you go. It's just like cleaning, I'd imagine. It's much easier to do your dishes, hypothetically, like every day than letting them pile up, right? And then you have a mountain to clean. I mean, hypothetically, because I do that all the time. So I'm just saying, I'm saying one would assume that would be easier, right? So this is exactly how we want to tackle kind of this administrative labor is we don't want it to pile up or we don't want to simply just not ever do it. And then once we, finally sit down, like we're going to start doing this, all of a sudden we have all this backlog of things to do. And again, some of our messaging apps, we can delete our messages. And so that's why in the moment that it's happening, somebody's calling in, whatever your policy is, we actually have them message. We don't have them call. They message their management group. And so we screenshot that, we send it to ourselves, right? And then it can be documented properly, because oftentimes we're not sitting at a computer when a cleaner is doing something. So that's why I really think that that's a practical way to handle it. Just screenshot. You're already screenshotting shit anyway, right? Screenshot it, email it to yourself. So then when you are in the mindset or frame of mind to be doing administrative labor at your computer and properly documenting everything from a staffing perspective, then you're being very methodical about it. And so that's how you like practically do things from the field, I find. And did I do any of this in the first year? Hell no. Did I do any of this in the second year? Hell no, right? But the point of this podcast is for you guys to implement things earlier in your business journey than I did. That's going to save you headaches. So all of that to be said, guys, I hope that this has been useful to you. I know it's been a lot. Here we are yet again at another hour solo episode, but there's just so much I have to say about this topic. And I really hope that if you glean anything and you're like, nope, I don't want to do my raises this way, what I would suggest is having it very clearly defined what is going to cause them to have a raise or cause them to not get a raise. Number one. And number two, be properly documenting as things occur so that when you do get to the performance review stage, or you're getting to the firing stage, or whatever you need to do, you've already got it all documented and laid out. And it just makes your life so much easier. You're thinking about your future self in this moment, and you're thinking about not just you, but the future administrative staff that you're going to have working for you. It's going to make their lives easier, and also just have everything very clear as to what is going on in the business. It really is a security blanket, is this level of documentation. It sounds complicated. It's really not. It just getting into the habit is truly the hard part. But once it's a habit and it sticks, it's going to just make you feel a lot more like empowered and control in your business. And this whole thing that I've talked about, this will empower your staff, right? I know it sounds like it's really, really strict or something like that. It empowers them to strive for excellence because it's actually going to positively affect their wages, right? They're not just one and done. They have something to strive for to continually improve their performance in your business. So I hope that this has been helpful, guys. Definitely let me know in the comments any further questions, or if you have found this useful, let me know. Anything else related to this topic I'd love to talk about in future episodes. Definitely give this like, hit that subscribe, go join the ZenMaid Mastermind on Facebook. It's an excellent group that we can all talk about our experiences, put out questions. It's a great place to be. And finally, as always, my email inbox is always open, guys. Stephanie@serene-clean.com. If you have any specific questions that you would like me to answer to you directly, or maybe do an episode about, you are free to email me. I am here for you to reference. So I will see you guys on the next episode, and I hope you're having a great day. Thanks so much. Bye.